fell in the parking lot of my own grocery store on a Tuesday morning in October, and the paramedics had to search my phone for 20 minutes before they found someone to call. Not because I don't have family. I have a son. I have a daughter-in-law. I have a 7-year-old granddaughter named Rosie who draws horses on every surface she can find. They called my son's number 31 times over the next 2 days. He never picked up once. By the time I opened my eyes in the ICU, he was 3 time zones away at a tech conference in San Francisco, and his wife had posted a photo of them at dinner with the caption, "Finally, some us time. No drama, no obligations, just us." I was the drama. I was the obligation. Let me back up. My name is Winifred, but everyone calls me Fred. I'm 64 years old. I live in Dayton, Ohio, and I spent 32 years as a registered nurse before my knees gave out and I retired early. My husband, Kenneth, died 18 months ago. Pancreatic cancer. Fast and merciless, the way it always is. We had 40 years together, Kenneth and I. 40 years of grocery lists on the refrigerator and arguing about the thermostat and holding hands at church. When he died, the house went very quiet in a way I still haven't gotten used to. After Kenneth passed, I tried to stay close to my son, Derek. He lives 40 minutes away in Centerville with his wife, Melissa, and their daughter, Rosie. 40 minutes isn't far. I told myself that. I told myself a lot of things. The Tuesday had happened. I had driven to Kroger to pick up a few things. Nothing dramatic. Soup, bread, the kind of orange juice Kenneth always liked that I still buy out of habit. I was crossing the parking lot, and then I wasn't. My hip gave out from under me, and I went down hard on the asphalt, and I couldn't get back up. A woman named Patty, a stranger who was loading her groceries into a Subaru 2 spots over, called 911. She stayed with me the whole time, held my umbrella over my head because it had started to rain. I didn't know her last name. I still don't. The EMTs got there quickly. They asked for my emergency contact. I gave them Derek's number. Then they tried it, and tried it, and tried it, and I had a fractured hip and a hairline fracture in my wrist and early-stage pneumonia I didn't know about, which complicated everything. They admitted me to Miami Valley Hospital and put me on the orthopedic floor and kept calling my son. 31 times over 48 hours. Voicemails. Texts. The hospital even contacted his workplace. Nothing. I was unconscious for most of those 2 days. When I came around, the first clear thing I saw was the ceiling tiles, and the second was my neighbor June sitting in the chair beside my bed with her coat still on and her purse in her lap like she'd just arrived, except the circles under her eyes told me she'd been there a while. June is 71. She lives across the street from me. We met 16 years ago when her cat got into my garden, and she came to the door to apologize and ended up staying for coffee for 3 hours. We've been close ever since. "Good morning," she said, when she saw my eyes open. Her voice was careful and soft. "June, mine came out like gravel. What time is it? Almost noon." She leaned forward. "Wednesday, Fred. You've been out since Tuesday morning." "Wednesday." I tried to make that land somewhere. "Derek. They've been trying to reach him." Her jaw tightened. Just slightly. "They're still trying." There was something in how she said it, something she wasn't saying yet. A nurse came in then, a young man named Theo with kind eyes and efficient hands, and he explained what had happened. The hip, the wrist, the pneumonia, the surgery they'd scheduled for Thursday morning. He explained it all clearly and calmly, and at the end he said, very gently, that the hospital had been unable to reach my next of kin, but that my neighbor had come in and been able to provide some information and had agreed to stay. "She brought your insurance card," Theo said, "from your purse at the house. She knew where you kept a spare key." I looked at June. "Kenneth told me," she said simply. "Years ago. I'm glad I remembered." We didn't say anything else about Derek right then. But that evening, after the doctor came and went and I'd eaten some soup I didn't taste, June showed me her phone. She didn't say anything, just held it out. Derek's Instagram. A photo posted Monday evening, the night before I fell. Him and Melissa at some rooftop restaurant in San Francisco, skyline behind them, cocktails in hand. Melissa's caption, ditching the noise and finally breathing. So needed this. No family drama, just vibes. No family drama, just vibes. No family drama, just vibes. I stared at those words for a long time. I scrolled down. There was another post from Tuesday afternoon while I was in surgery prep, and the hospital was on its 31st attempt to reach my son. Derek and Melissa at Fisherman's Wharf. Rosie wasn't in any of the photos. She'd been left with Melissa's parents, apparently. The caption on this one was a string of sunshine emojis and the words, recharging. Everyone needs to remember what it feels like to just exist without someone needing something from you. Someone needing something from you. I handed the phone back to June. I didn't cry. That surprised me. I thought I would cry, but what I felt instead was something quieter and colder than tears. Recognition, maybe. The feeling of a thing you've been half knowing finally becoming fully known. Because the truth was, this wasn't the first time. When Kenneth was in his final weeks, I called Derek every day, not to ask for anything dramatic, just to keep him close, to let him know how his father was doing, to give him the chance to come and say the things you need to say. He came twice, 2 visits in 6 weeks. The second time, he stayed 4 hours and left before dinner because Melissa had plans. At Kenneth's funeral, Derek gave a eulogy that made everyone cry. And I stood there thinking, where were these words when your father was still alive to hear them? After Kenneth died, I tried not to be a burden. Lord, I tried. I didn't call too much, didn't show up unannounced, didn't ask them to include me in things. I waited to be invited. I waited, and I told myself they were busy, they had their own lives. Rosie had school, and Derek had his job, and Melissa had her social calendar, and everyone was just so very busy. Last Easter, I asked if I could come for dinner. Derek said they were keeping it small, just immediate family. I am his immediate family. I didn't say that. I said, of course, no problem, have a wonderful day. I ate Easter dinner alone that year. Ham, for one, is a lonely thing. Lying in that hospital bed on Wednesday night, I thought about all of it. Every excuse I'd made. Every time I told June or my friend Corinne from church that Derek was just going through a stressful period, that Melissa wasn't unfriendly exactly, just private, that things would get better once work settled down, once Rosie was older, once. The thing about being a nurse for 32 years is that you learn to recognize when a situation is serious. You learn not to look away from the vital signs even when looking away would be easier. The vital signs had been poor for a long time. I just hadn't wanted to read them. Thursday morning, they took me into surgery. June stayed. She sat in the waiting room for 4.5 hours with a library book she later told me she didn't read a single page of. When they brought me out, she was the first face I saw, not my son, my 71-year-old neighbor in a waiting room chair, still wearing her coat. It was on Friday, the day after surgery, that Derek finally called. I saw his name light up my phone. I let it ring twice. Then I answered. Mom. His voice came out in a rush, all urgency and breathlessness, the performance of a concerned son. Mom, I just saw all these messages. What happened? Are you okay? I had no idea. I fell in the parking lot Tuesday morning, I said. My voice was steady. I was proud of that. Fractured my hip. Had surgery yesterday. Surgery. A pause. Oh my God. Mom, our phones were practically useless the whole trip. There was something wrong with the international settings. Derek. I said his name quietly. You posted 11 photos on Instagram between Tuesday and Thursday. You had enough signal for that. Silence. Not the silence of someone caught off guard. The silence of someone recalculating. That was Melissa mostly, he said finally. She handles all the social stuff. I didn't even know she was posting. The hospital called your office Wednesday morning, I said. Your assistant said you were in a meeting and would call back. You didn't call back. Another silence. Longer. I'm going to fly home, he said. Right now, today. Let me look at flights. You don't need to do that. Mom, of course I have what I need, I said. June is here. I'm taken care of. Come when you get back. I ended the call. My hand was shaking. My chest felt strange, and not because of the surgery. He and Melissa came the following Tuesday, 9 days after I fell. They arrived at my house. June had arranged to have me discharged there, had set up everything, had stocked the refrigerator, and arranged a temporary hospital bed in the downstairs bedroom, and they came in looking polished and prepared. Derek in a button-down shirt like he'd come from the office. Melissa in a blazer. No Rosie. She had dance class, they said. They sat in my living room for 35 minutes. Derek asked about the surgery twice, then moved on to talking about the conference. A great speaker he'd heard. A networking dinner. Melissa mentioned the restaurant they'd gone to on their last night. How exceptional the seafood was. 35 minutes. Then Derek looked at his watch and said they should probably get going. Let me rest. At the door, Melissa said, You know, Fred, we've actually been talking about your living situation. With Kenneth gone and you on your own, Derek and I have been wondering if it might be time to think about some kind of arrangement. I looked at her. What kind of arrangement? She smiled the way she always smiles, all surface. Just something more manageable. For someone your age, something with support built in. I said I'd think about it. I didn't sleep well that night. Something about the way she'd said it, something about the word arrangement sitting in my chest like a splinter. 3 days later, June called me from across the street. Fred, she said, can I come over? There's something you need to know. She arrived 10 minutes later with her coat and her careful eyes and a piece of paper in her hand. A printout. She sat down across from me at the kitchen table. My cousin works at Lakeside Pines, she said. Lakeside Pines is an assisted living community about 20 miles east of Dayton. Well regarded. Expensive. She called me yesterday. She said someone had called the admissions office asking about memory care and independent living options. They gave your name, your age, described your situation, said you'd been having some cognitive difficulties since your husband died. Cognitive difficulties. I'm 64 years old. I chair the fundraising committee at my church. I do the Wordle every morning in under 3 minutes. I taught cardiac care protocols to nursing students for 12 years. Who called? I asked. June set the printout on the table. It was an email her cousin had forwarded. An inquiry. Started online. Patient name, Winifred Ashworth. Age, 64. Submitted by Derek Ashworth, son. Reason for inquiry, cognitive decline following bereavement, inability to safely manage independent living, family concerns about daily functioning. Every word a lie. My hands were very still on the table. That's a thing I've noticed about myself in moments of real shock. I go very still. Kenneth used to say I had the stillest hands of anyone he'd ever met, that it's what made me good at the work, steadiness under pressure. I was steady now. But underneath the stillness, something was breaking open. There's more, June said quietly. She reached into her coat pocket and produced a brochure. Glossy. Professional photographs of smiling older people in a sun-filled dining room. Lakeside Pines, Senior Living Solutions. On the inside cover, a section on memory care and cognitive support. Someone had already requested a tour. The confirmation email had gone to Derek's address. The tour was scheduled for next Saturday. He hadn't mentioned it to me. Not a word. He's building a case, I said. My voice sounded far away to me. That's what my cousin thought, too. I sat there for a long time after June left, long enough for the afternoon light to shift across the kitchen floor, long enough to think about the house I was sitting in. Kenneth and I bought it in 1987. We put in the oak floors ourselves, on our hands and knees, over a long weekend in March while it snowed outside. The back garden is full of things Kenneth planted. I'm still learning all their names. Derek's name was on nothing. This house was mine. Kenneth's life insurance, his pension, his retirement savings. Everything had passed to me, properly, legally, as it should. I had just over $300,000 in investments and retirement accounts, the house, and a modest monthly income from my pension. Not wealthy by any standard. Comfortable. Mine. I thought about the word arrangement. I thought about 31 unanswered calls. I thought about Kenneth's last week, about Derek's 4-hour visit, about Easter dinner for one. Then I picked up my phone and called an old friend. Her name is Roberta, and she's been an estate attorney in Montgomery County for 25 years. We went to nursing school together, briefly, before she changed course. We've stayed friends the way some people do. The quiet, durable kind of friendship that doesn't need constant tending. "Fred," she said when she heard my voice, "I heard you were in the hospital. How are you doing, really?" "I've been better," I said. "Roberta, I need to talk to you about my estate, and I need to do it soon." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Come Thursday, my office. I'll clear my afternoon. What I'm about to tell you, I need to know you're still with me. If you believe that showing up when it matters is the bare minimum of love, type 1 in the comments. If you've ever had someone you trusted reveal that they were only there for what they could get, type 2. And if you believe it is never, at any age, too late to choose yourself, type 3. Your comment means more than you know, because the next part is the part that still makes my hand shake a little, even now, remembering it. Roberta's office smelled like coffee and old paper, and the particular kind of calm that competent people carry with them. I'd been there once before, years ago, for some routine paperwork. Walking in that Thursday felt different. I sat across from her and I laid it all out. The fall, the 31 calls, the Instagram posts, the Lakeside Pines inquiry, the tour scheduled without my knowledge, the arrangement. Roberta listened without interrupting. That's a skill, really, listening. Most people are already forming their response while you're still talking. Roberta wasn't. She waited until I was fully done, and then she said, "You're not the first person to sit in that chair and tell me a version of this story." "What do my options look like?" I asked. She walked me through it. I could revise my will entirely. I could establish a trust. I could designate a trustee she offered to serve to manage any funds designated for Rosie's education, completely outside Derek's access. I could redirect the bulk of my estate to causes that mattered to me. If you're of sound mind, which you clearly are, and you want to make these changes, I can have everything drafted in a week, she said. And given the circumstances, I'd recommend we also document your cognitive status formally, a simple assessment from your physician. Iron the whole thing shut. "Do it," I said. We talked for 2 hours. By the time I left, I had a plan. Here's what that plan looked like. A trust for Rosie, $50,000, designated for education only, managed by Roberta, inaccessible to either of her parents until Rosie turned 18. My church, Grace Lutheran, would receive a significant bequest. Kenneth had been a deacon there for 20 years, and it felt right. The Dayton Nurses Foundation, which funds scholarships for nursing students who can't afford the training, would receive a portion. June, who had sat in a waiting room for 4.5 hours reading no pages of a book, would receive enough to make her retirement more comfortable. And Derek would receive nothing. Not out of spite. I want to be clear about that, because spite is hot, and this was cold and clear, the way a decision feels when it is simply correct. I had my physician perform the cognitive assessment the following Monday. I passed everything. My doctor, who has known me for 11 years, wrote a letter that was, in her words, unambiguous. Roberta called me Thursday to say the new documents were ready. I called Derek Friday morning. I'd like you and Melissa to come over Sunday afternoon, I said. I need to discuss some things about the estate. He agreed immediately, too quickly. That eagerness I recognized. They arrived Sunday at 2. This time, Melissa had brought Rosie, which surprised me. Rosie ran in ahead of her parents and wrapped both arms around my waist without saying anything, just held on. She smelled like children's shampoo and something sweet. I held her as long as she let me, which was a good while. June was already there, sitting at my kitchen table. I'd asked her to be present, and she'd come. Derek's eyes went to her immediately. "What's this about?" "June is family," I said. "Sit down." We sat in a living room. Rosie settled on the floor with a coloring book she'd pulled from her backpack, completely absorbed. The adults arranged ourselves around her like a conversation she wasn't meant to hear. "Before we get to the estate," I said, "there are some things I want to say." Derek shifted. Melissa's expression went careful. I told them about the 31 calls. I told them about the Instagram posts, and I read the captions aloud. No drama, no obligations, just us. I watched Melissa's face and I watched Derek's, and I waited for either of them to try to tell me they hadn't had phone service. They didn't. That was interesting. "I know about the Lakeside Pines inquiry," I said. The room got very still. "My cousin works in admissions," June said quietly from her chair. She didn't elaborate. She didn't have to. Derek's jaw worked. Melissa looked at the carpet. "I was listed as having cognitive difficulties following bereavement," I said. "Memory problems. Inability to manage daily living. The inquiry was submitted in your name, Derek." "Mom, we were worried." "You were worried enough to file paperwork with a memory care facility," I said, "but not worried enough to answer 31 phone calls when I was in surgery." Silence. I looked at Rosie, bent over her coloring book, pressing hard with a green crayon. I thought about Easter dinner. I thought about Kenneth's last 4 hours, which I had spent alone because Derek had a meeting and drove home anyway. "I have made some changes to my estate," I said. I reached into the folder on the coffee table and passed them each a copy of the document summary Roberta had prepared. They read. I watched them read. Melissa found the Rosie section first. "There's a trust for Rosie," she said, and her voice lifted a little. "There is $50,000 for her education, managed by my attorney, no parental access until she's 18. The lift in Melissa's voice went flat. Derek found the bequest to June, then the ones to the church and the nursing foundation. He turned the pages. He kept turning. "Where's?" He stopped. "There isn't one," I said. "For you?" "No." He looked up at me. For a moment he looked less like a 40-year-old man and more like a boy who'd been told something he couldn't argue his way out of. "Mom." His voice was low. "You can't mean this." "I've had a complete cognitive assessment within the past 2 weeks," I said. "My physician has documented my mental status in writing. This will is properly witnessed and signed. Roberta has been doing this for 25 years, and she tells me it is ironclad." "This is because of one trip," Melissa said. Her voice had gone tight. "You're punishing us for one trip." "I'm not punishing you," I said. And I meant it. I'm making decisions about my own life and my own property, the way I'm entitled to do, the way I should have been doing a long time ago. Everything was fine before June got involved. Melissa's eyes moved to June, sharp. "Everything was not fine," I said calmly. "Kenneth's funeral. Derek stayed 2 days. Easter. I called to ask about dinner and was told you were keeping it small. 31 calls from this hospital while I was in surgery. You were not hiding from an obligation on that trip. You were hiding from a person. That person is me." Rosie looked up from her coloring book. She looked at her father, then at me, then back at her drawing. She pressed harder with her crayon. Derek stood up. Melissa stood with him. "We'll talk to a lawyer," Derek said. "Of course," I said. "That's your right. It will cost you considerably and accomplish nothing. But I understand. At the door he turned. He looked, and I say this without pleasure, he looked diminished. The conference tan, the button-down shirt, all of it seemed thinner somehow. "You'll be sorry when you need us," he said. I looked at my son, this person I had loved since before he took his first breath. "I've needed you before," I said. "You weren't there." The door closed. June and I sat in the quiet for a moment. Rosie was still on the floor. She looked up at me again, this time holding her coloring book out. She'd colored a horse, careful and deliberate, in shades of brown and gold. "Is this for you, Grandma?" she asked. My throat tightened. "Can I keep it? I made it for you," she said, as if this were obvious. I put it on the refrigerator that same afternoon, right next to the grocery list. The weeks that followed were not easy. I want to be honest about that. Derek called 7 times in the first 2 weeks. The calls cycled through the stages I recognized from years of difficult conversations in hospital corridors. Shock, anger, bargaining, guilt. He told me I was being vindictive. He told me Kenneth would be ashamed of me. He told me I was hurting Rosie, which was the one that landed closest to the bone. I said what I had to say. Rosie has a trust. Rosie is taken care of. Rosie is loved. Melissa called once, a week in. Her voice had the quality of a prepared speech. She said she understood why I was upset and that she hoped we could move past this and remain a family. I said I hope so too. I did mean that. I started physical therapy for my hip in November. My therapist, a quiet, determined woman named Chandra, had me walking without a cane in 6 weeks. She would count with me during the exercises, cheerfully, and I would think about how lucky I was to have ended up with someone who counted alongside me instead of waiting in San Francisco for me to stop needing things. Corinne from church came by twice a week with food and company and the particular comfort of someone who has known you long enough not to need to fill every silence. She'd known Kenneth. She sat in his chair without making a big thing of it, and I found I didn't mind. It felt like an acknowledgement that life continued, which it does, which it must. June brought her crossword puzzle and did it at my kitchen table on Thursday mornings. We didn't always talk much. Sometimes we just existed in the same room, and that was its own kind of abundance. In January, I did something I had been thinking about for a long time. I contacted the Dayton Nurses Foundation and asked if they needed volunteers. They said yes. I started going in 2 afternoons a week, helping with scholarship applications, talking to students who were struggling with the coursework or the cost, or both. Some of them reminded me of myself at 22, scared and serious and not entirely sure they'd make it. I told the ones who needed to hear it that I'd been scared too. That the scared ones often turned out to be the best nurses because they never stopped paying attention. I booked a trip to the Oregon coast for April. First trip alone since Kenneth died. First trip I planned for myself without consulting anyone else's schedule or preferences or convenience. 7 days. I rented a small house 20 feet from the water. I was terrified of it and I booked it anyway. What happened with Derek? I don't know how to resolve it cleanly. Life doesn't always do that. He called in February, just once, different from the other calls. Shorter. He didn't ask about the will. He didn't bring up Melissa or Lakeside Pines or anything. He just said, "I keep thinking about Dad's last week. I keep thinking I should have come more." I said, "You should have." He said, "I know." We were quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry I didn't pick up," he said, and he didn't add anything to it. No excuse attached, just the words. "I know," I said. "I don't know what that means for the future. I'm not in a hurry to know. Some things need to prove themselves over time, and I have learned at 64 that I am no longer willing to accept the promise of something in place of the thing itself. What I do know is this. Rosie comes over on Saturdays now. June brings her. It's become a thing. June picks her up, brings her to my house, stays for coffee while Rosie and I do whatever Rosie wants to do. which lately has been baking, laborious and joyful, and involving a great deal of flour on the kitchen floor. Rosie talks constantly while she bakes. She tells me about her teacher, about a girl at school who is her best friend this week and possibly her enemy next, about the horses she wants to have someday and exactly where she will keep them and what she will name them. I listen to all of it, every word. Last Saturday, she asked me while measuring brown sugar with great concentration, "Grandma, why do you live by yourself?" I thought about how to answer that. "I don't," I said finally. "Not really." She considered this, went back to her measuring. "June's here a lot," she observed. "Yes," I said. "She is. And Corinne. And Corinne. And me," she said. "And you," I said. "And you," I said. "Especially you." She seemed satisfied with this, poured the sugar into the bowl with tremendous ceremony. The horse drawing is still on the refrigerator. I've put a few more things around it, a photo from the Oregon trip, just the ocean and the early morning light, and a card Chandra gave me on my last day of physical therapy that said simply, "You did the hard part." I think about that a lot. The hard part wasn't the hip surgery, or the recovery, or the physical therapy, though none of those were easy. The hard part was looking clearly at something I'd spent years looking away from and deciding that my own life was worth protecting. I spent 32 years as a nurse. I took care of other people for a living. I was good at it. I believed, the way a lot of caregivers do, that the measure of love was how much you could absorb, how quietly you could need things, how little space you could take up while still being useful to someone else. I was wrong about that. It took a fractured hip and 31 unanswered calls and a glossy brochure from a memory care facility to teach me at 64 what I should have understood at 30. People who truly love you don't need you to make yourself small to earn it. I'm leaving for Portland in 6 weeks. I have a window seat booked and a house near the water and a list of restaurants I intend to eat at alone without apology, and I intend to order whatever I want off the menu and sit there as long as I like. The only approval I need for that is my own. I'm finally old enough to know that.